Or let's go to Birmingham. Scott Lucas is professor of international politics at Clinton University, at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. First off,
Thank you so much.
your reaction to this move by the hostage families and what they're doing there.
They're doing anything they can for the sake of their loved ones against elements who may not be listening. Let's be honest with the viewers. Hamas is using the hostages as bargaining chips, these 240 people. That's why they were taken on October 7th, initially as bargaining chips to try to get Palestinians out of Israeli detention, then as bargaining chips to delay the Israeli ground offensive, now as bargaining chips to get a humanitarian pause. But these hostages are effectively being held by Israel, by the Israeli leadership as well. While you have ongoing attacks, not only on northern Gaza, but across Gaza, while those attacks include being very close to and including hospitals, there is no space, no safe space to complete a hostage deal. There is no safe space, in other words, with a pause in the fighting, to get the hostages out of immediate harm's way, whether it's back into Israel or some type of protected area, if there is one left in Gaza. And at this point, it does appear that certain people in the Israeli war cabinet, notably Prime Minister Netanyahu, are not going to allow that safe space. So I feel for the hostage families. I feel for each one of those who has a loved one who is in jeopardy, as well, of course, as those who have already lost people in this conflict, because let us be honest here, those hostages remain as bargaining chips and not as human beings for the leaders on both sides of this conflict.
The hostages who have to contend on the one hand with Hamas and on the other with the scene we saw earlier at the Israeli parliament, where you had relatives pleading with far-right lawmakers to stop pushing for legislation reinstating the death penalty for Palestinians who were captured, warning the move endangers the lives of their loved ones. It seems to be falling on deaf ears for now.
It's falling on deaf ears with those far-right lawmakers in Israel. But I think we have a risk in the media, whether as journalists or as analysts, as to treating those loudest voices representing all opinion across the Knesset and across Israel. There are many Israelis who do not want to see the death penalty for Palestinians in some type of revenge reaction for what Hamas has done. There are many Israelis who do not want to see the effective trapping, the sealing off of the West Bank and all Palestinians there. And there are certainly many Israelis who do not want to see an expansion of the bombing and an expansion of the ground offensive. This is a split society. The problem is that the loudest voices in that society, in the Knesset, and probably within the Netanyahu government, are those who are intent, and again, let us be honest here, on, quote, destroying Hamas. And that idea of destruction takes the place of any type of move to try to step back from that destruction. In other words, the destruction of civilians, of hostages, be they Palestinian, be they Israeli, be they foreign nationals.
So let's talk about first the domestic calculus here. You mentioned earlier the divisions within the war cabinet. Now, the war cabinet, just to remind our viewers, it's kind of like a government of national unity, although not quite. One of the leaders of the opposition, Benny Gantz, most notably, is in this three-person cabinet. We saw open divisions over the weekend. What can happen? What are the possible scenarios there? Does Netanyahu have the final word?
There's maneuvering going on, and let's identify the three people as you've done. You've got Prime Minister Netanyahu. You've got the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, who is also fairly hardline on continuing and expanding operations. And then you have Benny Gantz, who is a former chief of the defense staff, a military man, then became a politician, leader of a party. And the notable thing about Benny Gantz is he said weeks ago, this will not be a fight that will end quickly against Hamas. What we need to look at this is more of a long fight. And that long fight meant not necessarily going in with the ground offensive or at least limiting the ground offensive to the north part of the Gaza Strip and letting the southern part of Gaza be a safe zone for civilians. Now, I don't think he's achieved that so far, as we've seen by the fact, as your correspondent noted, that attacks continue across all of Gaza, including the central and southern sectors. But in the past 72 hours, Benny Gantz has repeated this is a fight against Hamas which will take decades, indicating this is a political fight. This is an economic fight. This is a fight where you need international allies. And my reading of this is that Benny Gantz is trying to get space amidst all the international pressure to try to pull back on an all-out offensive against Hamas. I think
What are
also
his options? Does he quit the cabinet?
well,
Does he force the crisis, or does he stay in?
he looks at the international pressure. This is the question here. You talk quite rightly about the war cabinet, but you talk about the other players around this. And that is Benny Gantz's biggest ally, if this is the move that he's making, is the United States and most of the international community. Because they told the Israeli government soon after October 7th and the Hamas mass killing of Israelis and of foreign nationals, the mass taking of hostages, look, we agree with you that Hamas has to be pushed out of power. They crossed the line. But the question is, what's your end game? How do you do it? The same question that Benny Gantz pushed. Now, at this point, Netanyahu and Gallant are not only defying, I think, Gantz, they are defying the international community, including the UN, including the US, including European countries, such as France, including Asian countries, Middle Eastern countries. But at some point, do Netanyahu and Gallant risk Israel's international links? If they reach that point where that risk is too great, that's when Gantz has leverage. Not before that point, but at that point. Let me give you one piece of information that kind of slipped by. A week ago, Eli Cohen, the Israeli foreign minister, said diplomatic pressure will increase on us over the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think that was a signal from Cohen which said we've got a 3-week window to try to reach a conclusive defeat of Hamas. And at the end of 3 weeks, we've got to reassess. If that reading is right, we're a week into that 3-week window, and Israel has 2 weeks left to try to get to a point where it can claim it has defeated Hamas and then give a little bit of space to allow at least some civilians in Gaza to have some sense of safety.
Okay, Scott Lucas, then what to make of Joe Biden, again, because it's not the first time, saying we're getting closer to a release of U.S. hostages?
Well, I think the Biden administration, especially Biden, is trying to wish this. And they're trying to wish this not only, first of all, because you get some hostages out, which we all want, but secondly, because the way you get the hostages out will be in return for a humanitarian pause. The chatter, which your correspondents have been reporting on, is up to 70 hostages released for a pause of up to 5 days. And then that 5-day pause, you hope it turns into a longer pause, whether it's extended or whether you have another pause following quickly upon it. That's the American play. And Biden is trying to go with it can happen, it can happen, it can happen. In other words, he's trying to maintain some sense of hope that this will occur and to keep the channels open. The problem here is that there is a realism against that hope, which is that so far, Benjamin Netanyahu is not budging in public. Whether he's budging in private, given that Biden's message of hope is accompanied by warnings from the Americans that they will take some type of action against the Israelis if this continues, we have to see if that has any effect.
We saw him pen a open letter in the Washington Post where he most notably talked about visa bans for settlers in the West Bank who continue to harass and in some instances grab Palestinian land. Is that a serious threat?
Well, in fact, he dressed that up a bit. The reason why there is a visa ban on settlers in the West Bank actually has to do with something specific, and that is when Israel locked down the West Bank, which meant no Palestinian could move to Israel to work, for example. Palestinian Americans are unable to move to Israel. And the deal for the visa waivers is Palestinian Americans would be given freedom of movement into Israel. Now, Israel has violated that. They've broken that provision. That's why the visa waivers may be withdrawn for the West Bank settlers. What Biden did is, for a bit of PR, he dressed that up as an idea of, look, if you continue to allow violence to spread across the West Bank as well as in Gaza, then there is a price to be paid for it. I think actually it's a fairly weak statement. I don't think the Israeli leadership cares that much about the visa waiver program in the big scheme of things. If Biden is serious, if he's really serious, he's got to start talking about a suspension of American military aid to Israel. But his problem here is that if he moves to suspend military aid to Israel, much of Congress will be up in arms over that. And of course, Joe Biden's going into an election year where he wants to hold on to voters. He would hope to get Arab voters, but he especially wants to hope to get pro-Israel voters as well. And cutting military aid to Israel is not the way to get reelected.
Scott Lucas, many thanks for joining us from Birmingham.
Thank you, and thank your viewers.